The Prime Minister's warning to Congress.
My friends, for over a year, we've been told that no deal is better than a bad deal. Well, this is a bad deal. It's a very bad deal.
And now lawmakers introducing a bipartisan bill requiring congressional review of any nuclear deal with Iran. But President Obama is threatening to veto that law. And last night we spoke about that with Senator Rand Paul. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And there's news tonight that Senator McConnell, though, may opt not to put this bill on the floor.
Well, I think it's going to come to the floor, but I think the argument was, should it come to the committee first? I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, but I think there are still a lot of questions. I've been saying all along that I think the law requires the undoing of sanctions that were put on by Congress. Obviously, the law would require that Congress would have to undo these, that he can't do this on his own. So there's been a big debate whether the president can undo sanctions on his own, and that's what this bill will be the discussion about, is that Congress really should have to approve of an agreement.
All right, the Republicans are giving the president a lot of heat over executive orders going alone and not going to Congress and having things resolved. Can you tell me why this agreement with Iran that the president is negotiating isn't a treaty, nation to nation, nuclear weapons as well as monitoring, much like the START Treaty? And if it's a treaty, it should go to the Senate for advice and consent and a supermajority, 67 votes. Why isn't it going that way?
If it sounds like a treaty, looks like a treaty, why isn't it a treaty? I think it's a valid question, and it's a question I'll bring up. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, and when it comes up, that's going to be the debate, because we are going to be debating how we will approve of this agreement. The interesting thing about it is most of the discussion has been whether the president gets to do it all by himself with no approval or not, and this is the debate we've been having with the administration. What we've been attempting to do is to at least codify in law that we will have to approve it. One, to give him strength to negotiate from a position of strength, knowing that any old agreement's not going to pass muster. But I think you make a good point. It's a point we'll bring up next week is this a treaty? What is a treaty? And let's have that debate.
Well, it's almost this, though. And this, I can't figure out why this would not be a treaty, especially when you look at the very treaty the president proposed, negotiated, and had ratified by the Senate, the START Treaty, during his presidency, obviously, is what I don't, this is like in one way, I would think that the Republicans might say this is sort of an international executive order, that the president thinks he can go alone without the Senate. And when the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 says that he must go to the Senate for a treaty.
And that's a good point, because we have had a problem over the last 100 years of a lot of powers being given up by Congress and taken by the presidency. And there's gotten to be this category of things they call agreements. The Democrats are maintaining that there should be no vote in Congress on this. The Democrats are...
All right, time out. Remember when I brought this up 2 weeks ago? The press is finally getting on it.
Are uniformly opposed to, not uniformly, mostly opposed to the Corker bill, because they don't think the president should have any vote in Congress. And now the point you bring up is whether or not it should be a simple majority, like an agreement, or whether it should be similar to what a treaty is, which would be a 2/3 vote.
Of course, and so the whole thing is whether it's a treaty or not. All right, your thoughts on Prime Minister Netanyahu? What impact did he have?
I think a big impact, because it drew everybody's attention to and maybe broadened people's perspective on whether or not it's just about nuclear enrichment. He broadened the message, which is an important one, or broadened the question, which is maybe it should also be about them renouncing terrorism in the Middle East. Maybe it should be also about conventional weaponry, such as intercontinental ballistic missiles, that really it should be about an attitude. But I did like the fact that he said that the choice is not a bad deal or no deal. Maybe there could be a better deal, and that he wasn't opposed to negotiation, and that ultimately Israel, from his perspective, wants peace, and that we want peace. And I think that's an important message to continue to send, that we do want to negotiate. It's difficult to trust people who are your adversaries, and I think I acknowledge that as well. But I don't want this to be about ending negotiation and that the only alternative is war. And I think what I heard from Netanyahu is that continuing to negotiate and a better deal is better than a bad deal.
Senator, thanks, sir.
Just saying. Just saying. I brought this up about a week ago. and or maybe 2 weeks ago, and I got a little flack out of it. I got a lot of dislikes, which I'm perfectly fine with. But see, the other thing I mentioned in that video was this word deal. Okay, Rand Paul used the word agreement. And agreement, deal, it's still a fucking treaty. And that's what I keep trying to point out. So you saw the senators drafted a letter to go to the Republican senators did this to send to
Lindsey
Iraq.
Graham, South Carolina Republican. With us
I'll
from
let
the
you
Hill, the
listen
hearing
to this.
continues. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ah, you motherfucker.
ISIL is an organization, as an organization, is likely to evolve strategically, morphing, rebranding, and associating with other terrorist groups, while continuing to threaten the United States and our allies.
This dude's a douchebag.
Second, the proposed AOMF wisely does not include any geographical restriction, because ISIL already shows signs of metastasizing outside of Syria and Iraq.
So that was moments ago. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, that ISIS is spreading and growing more dangerous. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, with me now out of D.C. And Senator, good morning to you as that hearing continues. First,
Good morning.
draw a distinction for us between the point that Carter's making now about ISIS growing in influence and a story this morning in the New York Times suggesting that ISIS is actually being driven out of certain parts of Iraq. Is it possible that it's both right now?
Well, absolutely. They are the majority of the forces in Syria, but the efforts in Tikrit seem to be paying off. But the problem is this is a Shia-led operation against a Sunni stronghold in Iraq, and there is no ground force being formed in Syria. So even if you take Tikrit and Mosul back, it's going to be hard to hold it unless you go into Syria. That's where they reside in the largest numbers, and there is no plan to go into Syria.
Yeah, a moment ago during the commercial break, I don't know if you heard it, but Senator Marco Rubio was questioning Secretary Kerry. And the point that Rubio was making is that he believes that these Iran negotiations are dictating decisions on the military side.
Definitely.
And that is something Secretary Kerry vehemently disagreed with. If we get a moment, we'll cue it up and play it for our viewers. What is your view on that?
Well, I think it's absolutely certain that our desire to get a deal with Iran, no matter what, this obsession with a deal with Iran, has affected the policy against ISIL. There is no Arab army in the region going to go into Syria unless we also focus on Assad.
I said
To
that in
defeat
the
ISIL
video
in Syria
2 weeks ago, too.
and leave Assad in power is turning Iran over to Syria. The Iranians, as we negotiate regarding their nuclear ambitions, have toppled 4 capitals. Yemen, they control Lebanon through Hezbollah. Assad's a puppet, and the Shia militia on the ground doing the fighting are controlled by Iran. So no Sunni Arab group is going to help us defeat ISIL in Syria unless we turn on Assad. And the president has told the Ayatollah in a letter that he's not going after Assad.
You signed a letter as well that I'll get to in a moment. First, Secretary Kerry on.
Stay tuned to NTH channel because I'm cutting edge. I can see through this entire fucking bullshit. It only takes them 2 weeks to catch up. I guess maybe they're all subscribed to NT8. Could be.
What I just was referring to here.
It's really almost insulting that the presumption here is that we're going to negotiate something that allows them to get a nuclear weapon.
Well, I haven't discussed about the nuclear weapon, but and I'm not saying there's a grand bargain. What I'm saying is that I believe that our military strategy towards ISIS is influenced by our desire not to cross red lines that the Iranians have about U.S. military presence in the region.
Absolutely not in the least.
Okay.
There's no
Well, let me ask you
consideration
this.
whatsoever as to how they or anybody else, we will do what is necessary in conjunction with our coalition.
Now, with regard to Iran and the letter, Tehran has already called this.
Can I just comment on that for a second?
You can
if you don't
quickly,
mind,
yes.
John Kerry doesn't know what he's talking about. The only reason we can't get an Arab army to go with us into Syria. They have conditioned going into Syria on dealing with Assad. Turkey has said, we want a no-fly zone before we go in, and you have to promise us that you're going to get rid of Assad because Iran will run Syria. And the reason we're leaving Assad alone is that we don't want to upset Iran during these negotiations. So John Kerry is flat wrong.
And
Okay, that was about a month ago that I said that.
Sisi, the president of Egypt, said a similar thing, right?
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
he said you need a Sunni army that would be contributed to on behalf of the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Saudis.
Barack Obama is willing to give Syria to Iran by keeping Assad in power. No Arab is going to be willing to do that. So ISIL in Syria is never going to be defeated by an Arab army unless we also go after Assad. And ISIL is moving to Libya and other ungoverned spaces as we fight them in Iraq.
Yeah,
As the general starts
we'll bring a
page
map up here in a
4 of
moment.
notes.
We'll follow this along because you really need it. On Iran and the letter that you signed along with Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, Tehran called it a propaganda ploy. Well, why was it necessary to write and send such a letter?
Great question. I've been working on bipartisan legislation with Senator Corker, Menendez, and others that says Congress will not agree to lift the sanctions that we created unless we look at the deal and vote as to whether or not we want them lifted. The President of the United States does not have the authority, in my view, to tell the Congress that we cannot look at a deal that would lead to the lifting of the sanctions that we created.
He just kills himself by using the word deal. It's a fucking treaty. I keep trying to tell these fucking idiots this.
Did not sign the letter until the President threatened to veto the bipartisan legislation I just described. The moment that he told the Congress basically to go to hell, I wanted him, the Iranians, and the world to know you cannot deal us out. So if he's contemplating a deal with the Iranians that would give congressional sanction relief and not allow us to have a say, he's flat wrong, and that's why I signed the letter.
You heard Hillary Clinton yesterday. She says you either want to help Iran or hurt the commander-in-chief.
How about this, Secretary Clinton? We want to stand up for the idea that sanctions created by the Congress cannot be relieved by the commander-in-chief unless we agree. The only thing in this legislation deals with the lifting of congressional sanctions. And to Secretary Clinton, if you were president, would you deal Congress out? Would you threaten to veto a bill that's bipartisan requiring Congress to review your deal before Congress agreed to lift the sanctions they created? This is a very big deal. There's only one commander-in-chief, but we're the Congress. We created these sanctions bill. We should have a say. And by the way, the Congress, the Senate, hasn't toppled 4 Arab capitals. We're not building ICBMs, and we're not the largest state sponsor of terrorism. It is Iran, and we haven't been lying about our nuclear ambitions for the last 20 years. So this is really a challenge to the Congress's authority to deal with things that we created. This is not an imperial presidency as much as he would like.
Thank you, Senator. Lindsey Graham, South Carolina.
So, in conclusion, in my last 2 political videos, I've already covered all this shit. And now Fox News is finally getting to it. I don't expect CNN to do it, CBS, ABC, NBC, BBC, Sky News. They're not going to cover this shit. But I'm just telling you, cutting edge. I know what the fucking goddamn Constitution stands for. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 explains it all. Alright, I'm NT8. Hope you learned something today.